As we start the panel, I would like to ask the panelists to give a few minutes of introduction, each to the topic, and then after that, really have a discussion. If I may ask you to keep your remarks relatively short, this would be helpful for the overall discussion. We, as the first panel, I think need to set a fairly broad mandate in terms of how the commodity outlook is impacting the commitment and ability to really address the question of sustainability. How do the big players and the smallholders respond to the slowdown and really not just address the sustainability issue in isolation, but really put it as part of their business? So if I may, with that broad mandate, invite first Mr. Mark Wakeford to share with us his views from Indofood, Agri and Resources.
Just by way of introduction, to just put into context Indofood Agri, we're one of the largest agri-business in Indonesia. Our principal operations remain in Indonesia, where we have around 250,000 hectares of oil palm planted today. And we also have around 86,000 hectares of smallholder plantations and plasma schemes which we operate. On top of that, we have around 60,000 hectares of sugar, the majority of which is in Brazil. Around 50,000 hectares of that is in Brazil, but we're expanding our sugar presence in Indonesia. And then we have around 22,000 hectares of rubber in Indonesia. And then there's obviously palm oil is our major product. That goes into our refinery operations, where we're one of the largest producers of cooking oil, margarine and shortening in Indonesia. So the whole topic of today is very core to what we do. We were asked to talk a little bit about the sort of the global context on prices and then put it back into the strategies that we operate. It was interesting last night, across my desk, a price chart, which I'll just refer to. And it looks at the prices from 2009 to today. And if I take crops that are either global or relevant to Southeast Asia, Thai rice, soybean, wheat, palm oil, sugar, and cotton, in US dollar terms, they're basically the same price as they were in 2009. The one exception is rubber, which in today's terms, in dollar terms, is about 15% higher. But if you look at that in the course of the last 2 years, rubber's down 50% and all the other crops are down 30%. So the topic of relative price is always very critical to plantation owners. And therefore, one of the comments that was asked earlier, does price affect the impact on what we do for sustainability? I would say for the larger companies, no, but certainly for the smallholders, in terms of their operations, price has a huge impact. We buy from about 80,000 smallholders in Indonesia, and certainly price has a very strong impact to what they do agriculturally, what they do agronomically, and the sort of fertilizer that they buy. And these are important decisions for smallholders. If we look at the whole sustainability argument, and it's very interesting that sustainability has evolved in its definition. As a company, we started 30 years ago producing palm oil seeds. And today, the palm seeds that we produce and we sell in Indonesia can produce around 9 to 10 tons of palm oil per hectare on our own research blocks. But even ourselves, when we put that into our commercial plantings, we achieve around 6.5 to 7 tons of oil palm at maturity. So we're losing 30% of the genetic potential, and we would consider ourselves very good farmers. If we then take that back into a smallholder would achieve, on average, somewhere around 3 tons of palm oil per hectare. So a smallholder that's running his own plantation is losing about 70% of the genetic potential. So when we look at land use as a plantation owner, one of the critical things for us is making sure that we plant the right crop in the right land with the right climatic conditions. And that, to us, is the primary driver of sustainability in terms of land use. Because we know that the genetic potential is there in the palm seed, for example. But clearly it's not being fully utilized and developed. And some of that comes down to agronomy practices. Some of it comes down to ability to finance fertilizer. I'll give another example. We buy sugar cane from about 800 to 900 farmers in Java. And this is a business we entered in 2009. And when we went to visit these farmers, the first thing we noticed, and I'm not a sugarcane expert, so I'm referring to people that know better than I, the first thing we noticed was how green the cane was. Now, to most people, a green, very green plant is a very healthy plant. But actually, our nutritionist said, these farmers are putting on too much nitrogen. And therefore, they're spending, and we've taken 6 years to convince them, that they're spending about 30% too much on nitrogen in their fertilizer because they believe that green sugar canes gave them the highest yield. So since 2009, their cane yield per hectare has grown about 10%, and their fertilizer application has gone down 20%. So sustainability, when we use the phrase, can have different applications in different meanings. Now, we're listed here in Singapore, so just to touch on a couple of the other themes that have already been mentioned. Tomorrow, hopefully, I'll be signing off our third sustainability report, which we'll publish in the next 2 weeks. We've been following the GRI 4 standard since last year, which focuses on materiality. So we're very supportive of the SGX initiatives in this area to encourage and ultimately enforce companies to actually publish sustainability reports. So in that, we've been very clear on our targets, which by 2019, we intend to have 100% of our palm plantations, including our smallholders, certified under RSPO. We have about 35% today, and this year we should get the first of our smallholders certified. And at the same time, we have commitments that by 2020, 100% of our supply chain, because we're a refiner in Indonesia, so we use about 1 million tons of palm oil in our refineries, 100% of that supply chain will be both traceable and certifiable under international standards, which today would represent RSPO. So we've made very clear commitments, and there's many others that are in our sustainability report, but we've made very clear commitments as to how the sustainability journey forward will look for us. And then each year, for the last 3 years, we've been reporting on progress, and I'm glad to say that for 2014, in the report in the next 2 weeks, you'll see that on certainly the first of those targets on RSPO, we're now slightly ahead of the targets we set ourselves. So these are all very important things. I think at the beginning, the chairman of this session asked whether with low prices sustainability will be impacted. I think for the plantation groups like ourselves, it won't. It's a clear long-term commitment for us and how we look at sustainability as a core part of what we do. But clearly for other players, and particularly smallholders who today still have a low recognition and an acknowledgement of what really sustainability means, it's up to the companies like ourselves who have a close engagement with those smallholders to provide the education process. So we do that with our palm smallholders through the ISPO system, through the RSPO system. And we do it with our sugar smallholders just by applying similar principles, although we don't today have an accreditation system which will audit them against. But we've started in Brazil with a Bon Sucro certification. So I think in conclusion, prices are clearly a common lead indicator in terms of the amount that we can invest and reinvest in our agribusiness. But ultimately, it comes back to having using the genetic potential of the material that we have to achieve the yields, which means that sustainability in terms of land use is at the end of the day maintained and the rate of growth slows down. I'll leave you with one statistic. It's about the only reliable statistic I can give you in Indonesia because it's published by listed companies. If you look at the rate of new plantings of oil palm by the listed companies that have plantations in Indonesia, in 2009 it was 120,000 hectares. Last year it was 59,000 hectares. 59,000 hectares is almost exactly the size of Singapore. So the rate of new planting has halved, and part of that is to do with land use, part of that is to do with licensing, part of it is to do with the moratorium. But the clear signal is that the rate of growth of the palm plantation business in Indonesia is slowing down quite dramatically. And And I think the companies, like ourselves as well, are focusing on intensifying yield for increasing yield per hectare. With that, my time's almost up, so I'll hand it back to the chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think that's a very good start, that recognition that lower prices does affect the smaller companies, but companies such as yourself, to meet their long-term commitments, adding new commitments. In fact, I invite you next year to launch your report at our platform, SWR next year, if you want to. And more than that, looking more broadly at the landscape in Indonesia, this idea that intensification, a better yield, better habits of agronomy will be the way forward rather than larger and larger land clearing. If I could turn to the next speaker then, this is Dato Yohav, the president of Apical and AAA Oils and Fats. This company is part of the Asian Agri group and deals with more of the mid and to downstream parts of the business as well as the trading subsidiary. It's headquartered here in Singapore and has made commitments to sustainability. Dato Yohav, please.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. I guess, in the commodity market, by definition, everyone is a price taker. So low commodity prices, in fact, drives home the point that we really have to be cost efficient, and productivity, is a constant strive, to increase productivity. Well, with regard to the impact on environment, certainly I think the haze of the last 2 years, that really when you are people are affected and you can hardly breathe, yeah, it drives home the point that you have to take immediate action in stopping deforestation and to do whatever we can. But I think besides the immediate things that we can do, it's also important to put in long-term structural changes that are sustainable. So I would like to then therefore talk about it in this context, and it's similar to what the first speaker has mentioned. For the plantation industry, we really have to face up to the fact that labor shortages, is going to be an increasing issue, for Indonesia, especially when the nation, industrialized. So you're going to have shortage of labor, and therefore it is absolutely important to improve and to increase on productivity. Just now, the minister, mentioned that Indonesia currently has 6 million, hectares, planted. If, we can increase the existing yield, the yield from the existing hectarage by 50%, that will mean, another 12 million tons, without, having to touch on a new hectarage. And that is absolutely possible. In our case, we work closely with Asian Agri. Asian Agri, through our research institute, we have the new generation of oil palm seedlings that can easily increase, yields by 50%. And the thing about this, from an economic standpoint, is that because a lot of the costs are common overheads, things like the staff quarters, and the meals and so on. So when yields go up by 50%, your profitability, your returns, can actually almost double, in fact. So there is a lot of, there should be a lot of emphasis, in trying to get the smallholders to, replant. And because, like, for example, in Asian Agri's case, we started planting about 30 years ago. So we are in the process, of actually replanting the old areas. And likewise, the plasma scheme, where Asian Agri has the highest plasma scheme in Indonesia with 60,000, hectares under us. So we are encouraging our smallholders to replant. Asian Agri is supplying them with the new generation of seedlings, so that when they replant, they can, increase their yield by 50%, your profit by, double, and therefore, there is no necessity, no incentive, to really go and clear, because as you expand, increasingly you are actually going into marginal lands, that are giving diminishing returns. So this is the type of structural change that I think the industry should focus on, rather than, to just continue to, madly, expand and you have diminishing returns. The second point I would like to make is that, like in Apical's case, we don't really grow any trees. We are processors and planters. We are processors, and traders. Asian Agri supplies 20% of our oil, as our anchor supplier. So our business model centers upon our supply chain, and to make any meaningful change in respect of sustainability, obviously we need to, engage all our stakeholders, especially, our suppliers. So we have done that both on the, with regard to our suppliers as well as, our customers. We sign up to, we have a very public sustainability manifesto. So we have, positively engaged our suppliers on our commitment, educate them, and using Asian Agri, as an example, where how we could work. We have, been, in fact, we are probably one of the first to get, the plasma shareholders, to be certified. So Asian Agri itself is 100%, will be 100% certified, RSPO certified by end of 2015. And about a third of our smallholders, have also, been certified. So likewise for third-party suppliers, the response have been very positive, and I must say we also have our customers to thank for. When customers brought up the issue of sustainability, we likewise engage them, bring them to the ground so that they can better understand the reality on the ground. The fact that, for the industry in Indonesia, 40% of the supply come from smallholders. And if we just walk away and we don't engage them positively, changes are not going to happen. So some of them, some of our enlightened customers, actually also, step in, to help in funding the smallholders to get a certification, in return for securing, sustainable supply, so on. So I think that is, positive, engagement with the supply chain. That is, very important. So I would like to leave it at that.
Just one question, maybe Dato. You mentioned helping the small growers in terms of putting new seed, etc. And you mentioned the need for funding. Will your company actually fund your own plasma growers, or what's the third-party funding?
Actually, it's both. We help them, in fact, it's not just supplying the seedlings, giving them the advance when needed, but also, in fact, it's on a day-to-day basis, we have full-time managers, engaging them, helping them on agronomic practices on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to our third panelist, and this is Mr. Stewart Lindsay, who is the Corporate Affairs Director for Bunge. And they've come in from, Stewart, you come in from all the way from New York for this. So thank you very much for flying in. I think Bunge needs no introduction as a global player. So, hopefully you can describe your own policies for us as a global player about sourcing from our region, sourcing from companies here as compared to elsewhere. Please, Stewart.
Thank you very much, and delighted to be here. I'll give a little bit of an introduction about Bunge because some of you probably don't know us too well. We're a nearly 200-year-old agribusiness and food company, and we specialize in oilseeds and grains. So we buy, and we also have a sugar business in Brazil. So we're buying crops from farmers all over the world, processing them, trading them, shipping them. We have a big asset footprint in North and South America and Europe, and over the past 10 or 15 years, we've built a pretty sizable presence here in Asia with operations in China, India, Vietnam, Australia. We buy and trade palm oil, but we don't operate our own palm oil plantations. So some of the ideas and views that I'll share this morning are really drawn from our experience on a sustainability journey in multiple regions across multiple crops. We've got a long way to go on that journey. We're pretty humble about, we're proud of what we've done, but we're humble about what we have yet to do. And so I'll make two basic observations that I think apply pretty broadly. One is a sweeping one, and the other one is a fairly practical one. This is a panel about price, and I think that's a great opportunity. And I'm happy to participate in it because I think price is actually one of the big challenges that we face when it comes to sustainability. Not just the price of commodities themselves, but the price, or I should say the lack thereof, for the assets that we're actually trying to protect, natural capital and ecosystem services. A quick view from our perspective about what's happening with price and what the impacts are. It's been said earlier that the prices have fallen. In the near term, we've seen back-to-back crop cycles with very good harvests in most major commodities globally. That's come at the same time that you've seen a reduction, really, in the growth of biofuels. That growth mandates have been reached. The oil price has dropped, and there's been a moderation in some economic growth in major markets. So today, the stocks of vegetable oil and most major commodities are ample. So the near-term function of the market is to moderate supply. So growers, producers across most commodities, it may be slightly different in palm oil, but in most commodities, and especially growers really in frontier areas that are looking at incremental capital investment for new land or to bring land up to production capacity, are really getting a signal to moderate that. So from a land change perspective, that's a fairly positive development. Obviously, we're more concerned about the long-term level of price, and in that sense, demand for agricultural commodities across a lot of different value chains is very clear and consistent. If you look at the per capita consumption of vegetable oil globally, the forecast for that, the chart looks like that. If you look like the global total demand for protein meal, the chart looks like that. Biofuels is more moderate, but the long-term function of the marketplace, let's be perfectly clear, is to drive greater agricultural production. Much of that can come from intensification, and that's a good thing. But the invisible hand of the market is also telling farmers in a lot of different places to plant, to expand area. It's probably not going to be as quick as it has been in past years, but it's still, in many places, an economically rational choice for farmers to expand. So that really brings us to the question of what should be the price for commodities, what should be the overall price we're talking about, and how can we inform that price in a way that accomplishes both of the things we need to do. One is grow production, and the other is to conserve some of the natural assets that we're talking about. That really is a discussion about the allocation of value along the chain. For companies like Bunge, it's been said earlier, big company, while there isn't always an explicit value for a sustainable product, there is a big implicit value in pursuing these sustainability goals. Yes, we want to ensure our reputation is good, but we also want to win larger share of wallet of major customers, many of whom are embedding sustainability into their decision making. And as a public company, we want to attract investors, and this is becoming a bigger concern for investors, especially from a risk management standpoint. We've been engaged in a lot of different things, from a soy moratorium in the Amazon in Brazil to working with multi-stakeholder groups on satellite monitoring and legal enforcement in trying to improve the measurement of agricultural sustainability and close performance gaps. We're part of certification schemes, and last year we launched a new palm oil sourcing policy that's dedicated to 100% no deforestation, no HCS, no peat. And absolutely there will be more to come from us. I think one of the challenges we've seen in different value chains is that there isn't such a strong value proposition to independent producers. If you're a soybean farmer in Brazil, for instance, if you have forested land that exceeds your legal mandate, what do you do with that land? There is a cash flow potential from that land. So on one side, the market is saying you should plant that land. On the other side, we're saying you should conserve that land. One option gives you money, the other option gives you nothing. That's a pretty tough argument to make. And I've been involved in sustainable soy efforts for 10 years, and we're still debating how to imbue a sustainable soybean with enough of a value proposition that it translates from consumer to grower. So the first sweeping observation would be, if we really want to preserve natural capital and ecosystems around the world, we do have to find a way to price them better. There's a lot of work has been done in this area. It's certainly not a new idea, but it's one that really we see oftentimes as being a stumbling block. And so if there's ways to create natural capital markets, we should do that. Bunge has been engaged in these efforts in the past. Carbon markets, we did a RED project in Brazil. There's a lot of effort on the compliance side. The Norwegian government has been very active in this space. We'll hear from them later today. But that would be a key step, I think, to achieving the larger goal that we're all trying to meet. The second is far more practical. There's been great work done by NGOs all around the world in creating better data about sustainability. Yield gaps, watershed analysis, land use change, analysis of different landscapes. But I try to put myself in the shoes of a strategic planner or a commercial person at Bunge. And the question is, well, what do I do with all this? It's very clear, at least methodologically, that there are places we shouldn't go. But how do I integrate that into commercial decision-making and planning? So one of the things that we're interested in collaborating more on are tools. There's one under development in Brazil from the Nature Conservancy and the University of Sao Paulo to integrate this data with commercial information more directly. So we have the ability, long-term and in the near term, to make better sourcing decisions and plan not just where we put our next incremental facility, but if the market is heading in a specific direction, one that has risk potential, how can we avoid that? So two ideas. One, a big one, if somebody can solve it, that would be fantastic, which is a natural capital market. And the other is collaborating on useful tools that companies like Bunge can use, especially in value chains where we're buying from tens of thousands of independent farmers and need a way to make decisions better. So happy to be here. Look forward to your questions, and thanks very much for your time.
Stewart, thank you very much for those comments as a global company. But maybe I could ask one question quickly. You said you want this tool to help you source, but how do you already look from a sort of New York base at Southeast Asia and particularly Indonesia as sourcing? Have there been question marks raised in New York about sourcing of resources and palm oil from here?
Certainly, I think we've faced many of the similar questions that other companies have faced about that, and our presence in palm oil trading and handling has really grown in the last several years. So it's become a more material part of our business volumetrically. And we do face questions and challenges about that. from a variety of different parties, including customers and other stakeholders. So the introduction of our policy last year was really an effort to bring a level of transparency and sustainability to our palm chain, and to do it in the near term. So we're currently actively mapping our supply chain globally. We're trying to identify areas of higher and lower risk, and we're working, we think, with good third parties on that, and we look forward to making progress on it. So that's been something we've been working on very hard.
Thank you again, Stewart. Our last but certainly not least panelist is Pak Koni, on my right. Pak Koni is from the newly established Indonesian headquarters for WRI, the very well-known World Resource Institute from America. Pak Koni used to be with the UPK4 as a deputy minister, and therefore has really first-hand knowledge of the country and efforts to really implement decisions that work on the ground. Pak Koni, would you like to share some perspective with us about how things are in Indonesia and how big and especially the small and medium companies are doing?
Good, thank you. I have to say that that is not my expert, but I'm trying to get a general overview of it in relation to the price of the commodities and the palm oil issues that currently WRI trying to do together with the private sector and the government. Smallholders consist of or produce around 40 to 45% of the CPO. That's why they are matters. Yeah. And for us, the relationship between smallholders and the big private company is essential. As the gentleman, the first speaker, telling us that doing the genetic modification approach could provide yield that reach to 9 to 10 ton per hectares. And this is something that can be shared with the smallholders. But the issue would be that the smallholders mostly don't have legality. That is going to be a challenge for the sustainability supply chain that is being put forward by big companies. Yeah. So, well, I try to, as WRI, we try to deal with that. Yeah. Try to give a bridge between the smallholders and the big company in terms of ensuring clarity in terms of legality, clarity in terms of mapping and those kind of things. As you know, WRI is pretty much working based on map. Yeah. Now, we have a lot of existing initiatives that could help us in bridging that big private company and smallholders in terms of increasing productivity, because those increasing productivity is the key here within this talk within the panel. There are at least 4 existing initiatives, which is for me is really, really important to be used as a basis to move forward. One is IPOP, that is Indonesia Palm Oil Pledge, which is a pledge made by 5 big companies, and in essence, they're trying to do a no deforestation, no peatland, and no conflict kind of pledge. This is important, and that entails an openness and transparency of a lot of information in regard to how they manage the concession and how this would then relate to the smallholders, which is also important part of the production of the CPU. That's one thing. And the second is, as Pa Arif also mentioned about the One Map. Yeah. One Map is the government undertaking, let's say, to synchronize and harmonize all maps and geospatial information that could help clear out things like, for example, the legality of the smallholders, which then could hamper the process of the company to meet the sustainability supply chains pledge. So with these two, WRI propose or facilitate a government-led initiative that we call One Map of Riau. Why is it Riau? This is precisely to answer what Arif just mentioned, that we need to go down on the ground in order for us to be able to move things toward a good governance in terms of palm oil in particular and sustainable land use in general. With this kind of transparency put up by IPOP pledge and this government-led One Map movement, we combine that, then we can go into at least 5 directions. Yeah. One is to have a clear and transparent land use of the big private company, those 5 IPOP signatories. Yeah. And doing so, we also then map out also the smallholders polygons, if you like. Yeah. Meaning that then we can see we can synchronize those two because of this exercise. And then we, at the same time, we will deal with the third existing initiative, which is the participatory mapping of the indigenous people and community mapping. Yeah. Now, these three, it is going to be discussed, yeah, or communicated through a forum, to an open forum, whereby every stakeholders in regard to this would sit there. So in that forum, the private sector would meet with smallholders, would also meet with the indigenous people and community, and they can, together they develop the protocol to share information and protocol to come up with solution. Yeah. So this is how then we have a clear and accountable land ownership for every part, for every parties, and then with that, then we can move along with a better approach on, for example, increasing the productivity of the smallholders, because private sectors already have everything that needs to be, let's say, handed over or support the smallholders. Yeah. So why is it Riau? Because this is actually the ground zero of almost everything. Yeah. Land conflict, indigenous people conflict, even haze. Yeah. And also, at some point, our President Jokowi mentioned about having 1,000 canal blockings. Yeah. This can only be done if we have a very good map that should be generated from the ground. Yeah. So with this, we address a lot of issues in regard to coming up with the sustainable land use. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. All of them have shared their present plans, but also perhaps future ideas, whether it's a tool for analysis or particular example of the larger One Map, looking at the One Riau map, as well as efforts to really clean up the supply chain, help the smaller companies. A number of questions have come in on the live feed, and I'm open to live feed the other way. But if I may start with trying to bring some of the questions together. I guess sustainability is a very broad issue. Not just the haze, but the land issues, the water issues, the nature conservancy on the ground. What are the critical markers we should look at, especially from the smaller companies? Stewart, for example, when you asked for this idea of this tool, right? Looking out at the, Lindsay, you looked at the possibility of having a data or toolkit to help you analyze where people should be buying from. What sort of factors would you look at? And the others So working closer with the smaller growers. What are the factors to look at? Factors. Yes.
I think the factors we would look at for a tool like that, or generally for sourcing, is obviously some kind of a degree of clarity about where and how to do this sourcing. We spend a lot of time working with independent farmers, so we don't have control over the land use decisions that people make. Tens of thousands of them, which is a little bit different. I mean, we do in our sugarcane business because we basically own the plantations, but we don't most other places in the world. So the challenge we have is how do you, in a sense, regulate a supply chain in an extra legal sense, oftentimes above the law, and have the information that really helps make those choices. So transparency of land use planning, better land use planning within governments, transparency of that data, and again, the ability to integrate that data more efficiently into decisions. Our industry spent quite a bit of time over the last decade investing in and satellite monitoring systems over different parts of the Amazon biome, exactly to help manage a pledge that we made not to buy soy from newly deforested areas. It was a very successful program, and that data was extremely helpful. So I think the factors you would look for would be really robust land use planning at a government level, good data, clear data, and the systems to make it all work.
Anyone else like to comment on this rather broad question? How do you manage down into the small and medium smallholders, and what sort of factors in the whole web of sustainability do you look at?
Okay, I'll add some comments to that. I mean, maybe if I just look at it from the perspective of what we do as a plantation company, which would equally apply to a smallholder. I mean, the first thing we look at is what actually is the land use today, what's the soil properties. We look at 3D contour maps so that we can look at the water flow, water retention, soil retention, but also then we look at climatic data, rainfall, etc. And from all of that, we can begin to start narrowing down what sort of suitable crops are relevant for that particular land. And obviously, I'm talking about land that's not virgin forest, so land that's either already been cleared or has a crop on it today. I think it's been touched on. I mean, the difficulty is how to impart that to a smallholder who has a different signal in terms of what he wants to use his land for. And therefore educating the smallholder, but encouraging them through price signals that whatever they do, they will get a remunerative reward. But often, as was mentioned earlier, it is simply a case of the land that they have today is not producing any economic return, and almost planting anything on it will give them a better return than doing nothing. So on the one hand, from an agricultural perspective, there's a lot of information and data that you can look at. But from a smallholder's perspective, it's almost sometimes a binary question.
That's why we'd like to start with first to make it clear the boundaries of each of the holders, big holders or small holders. Yeah. And then with that, if we have issues on what you call it, a low productivity, yeah, then we can, with this kind of legality, then we can support either the support coming from the government or coming from the private sector. It will be useful to start with the clarity of the land, yeah, land titling and this kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just to add, from a supply chain management perspective, I think for us what we do is start from the macro side, mapping of where our suppliers are, to get a sense, to do a macro risk assessment, and then for those higher risk area, then we zoom in for a closer look. And now we have also engaged an external party to help us, in setting up a more, vigorous system and to independently, verify. We have, engaged TFT to do that as well. I think so that helps.
So in a way, traceability, certification, these are some of the steps being taken and necessary. Yeah. I'm open to questions from the floor. Yes, there's a hand right here in front.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Tint. I'm from the Center for People and Forests, also known as a Regional Community Forestry Training Center based in Thailand. I'm very glad to hear a lot of concern. I'm talking about the smallholders because our organization is working for the local communities and especially for the very disadvantaged, the indigenous people as well. One of the fundamental questions I want to have is I really like to hear some of the discussion about pushing the nature has a limited capacity, but we are pushing too much, beyond this limited capacity of the nature by using the technological innovation, using the fertilizers or using another genetic modifying products things. So that we all need to be careful, whether you are the smallholder or the large holders, we need to respect the limited capacity of the nature. Okay, this is one of the things. Another thing is, another fundamental question is, you mentioned about the falling price. Who decides the price? When you look at the global commodities, I never see that as an end consumer, we never pay the cheaper price. We always pay the increased price of the commodities again and again, day after day. But now mentioning about the falling the price, who decide the price? And who are the big players, controlling this market price? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tint. I guess the first question is a kind of very naturalist skepticism about new seedlings, new methods. I think both Dato and Mark, you emphasize this, I think especially Mark. Would you like to respond to this part?
The first question about nature's limited capacity.
Yes.
I think the simple answer to the question is if you're an agricultural historian, at almost every point in time that people have come up with forecasts of world population growth, the question has always been asked, can we feed the world? The latest population forecast is 9 billion people by 2050. Can we feed the world? And the simple answer to the question is that the farming world has always delivered against the promise to feed the world. The challenge is more about getting the nutrients to the right part of the population. And let me just give you some simple data around this. Today we have 7 billion people in the world, and very simply, 1 billion are overnourished and 1 billion are undernourished. But we have enough calories, and if you take 1% of the world's calorific production today, which is about 35 million tons of grains, you can feed the calorific gap of those 1 billion people. But 100 million tons of grains go into biofuels. So it's not a question, I think, of the natural limitations of the resources. Farmers have always risen to that challenge. And it's not always about genetic modification either. Palm is one crop that is not genetically modified. We've always risen to the challenge to increase the productivity. I think the bigger challenge is growing the right crops in the right parts of the world and then moving them efficiently to where they're in deficit.
Thank you, Mark. Dato, would you like to?
From the question I have there, the impression that perhaps you think that when we talk about intensification and increase in use, we are stretching it. But I would just make it very clear that this is by no means the case, There's really a lot of wastage that goes on in the plantation. So especially from the smallholders' perspective, they do not have access to superior planting materials, to better seedlings, and then their agronomic practices, leaves much to be desired. So, if assistance can be given to them, actually a lot can be extracted out of the same piece of land. So I think that definitely is not a question of stretching nature. It's very much within the means. Well, as to price, I would say that for the major commodities, and palm oil is the leading vegetable oil, in the world. It's such a huge market, and palm oil also competes with soybean oil, with rapeseed oil, and so on. So, it's huge. There's no way anyone can really, control prices as such. So it's really a function of demand and supply. The only thing is that because palm is a perennial crop, so once you plant it up, you are stuck with it for the next 25, 30 years. But the adjustment to lower prices typically comes from the annual plantings like soybean and so on.
Stewart, Lindsay, you'd like to say something?
Yeah, I would say, I think I understood the question slightly differently in terms of respecting the natural limits. If you look at some of the work that's been done out of University of Minnesota and other research arms about yield gaps globally, there's significant yield gaps, 40 to 70% across most crops and in many regions. So I think we're a long way from testing the absolute maximum limits of nature's capacity. In many places, there's a wasteful use of inputs, too much applied in a way. Mark mentioned earlier about a nitrogen example. That's an example that's all over the place. There's too much water applied in many places. But in terms of the aggregate ability of natural capacity to produce more, there should be conceptually a long way to go. And on the second question about price, the first simple answer to that is Mother Nature determines the price of a lot of these commodities. If you look at the big volatility in price that we saw in ag commodities in the 2008 to 2012 period, the major contributors were drought. The second major contributor was government trade policy. So there's a lot of capriciousness in the world when it comes to trade tariffs, trade embargoes that have a really profound effect on price. Overall, though, the last many decades, the real price of most of these agricultural commodities has dropped. So they're actually more affordable than they used to be.
Thank you. We'll take two questions in a row, and then we'll get the panel to respond and wind up. First, here, and then here. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I'm Glenn Hurwitz. I'm the chairman of the Forest Heroes campaign. Professor Tate, it's good to meet you finally. We've been trying to connect for a long time. Thanks. I think, Forest Heroes campaign is a global effort to break the link between agriculture.
I'm sorry, I think something about the microphone. You might have to hold it a bit closer and speak a bit
there we
slower.
Go. The Forest Heroes campaign is a global effort to break the link between agriculture and deforestation. We've, from our perspective of trying to drive sustainability, drive forest conservation, we've seen the relatively low commodity prices recently as a major opportunity. Essentially, as Stewart alluded to, a lot of companies are they're not making the same level of profit from expansion, and so that's given us a breather where we're able to get companies to adopt no deforestation policies that hopefully will endure when commodity prices go back up. I guess my question is really targeted to what happens when that occurs. It's been incredibly exciting to see the positive momentum towards forest conservation and human rights respect in agriculture and in forestry in Southeast Asia. According to our analysis, more than 90% of globally traded palm oil is now covered by strong no deforestation policies. But the challenge that the industry is facing, that we are facing as people trying to protect nature and human rights, is that there are still several rogue actors out there, people who are not compliant with these strong forest conservation. They're the ones causing the haze. We've been working with Bunge on Sarawak, which is a global epicenter of peat clearance. In Astra Agro Lestari, First Resources are two Indonesian producer companies that are engaged in deforestation. And then you have Indofood, which I must say I was listening, and you're hearing about RSPO standards, and there's not really strong forest conservation. My question to the panelists is, what do you do about these rogue actors, these red list companies who have not risen to the global standard of forest conservation? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And there was one more hand here somewhere. Please go ahead.
No, thank you, Simon. My name is Ramon Lachumanan. I was a long time in the ASEAN Secretariat looking at haze issues, but now I'm at the NTU. I'm very disappointed because I thought this panel is about the big players and what they're doing. But it seems to be, all of you seem to be talking about smallholders and the kind of CSR work you're doing. Granted, I think Mark made a point that despite the 30% to 50% drop in prices, the big players are not affected as far as sustainability is concerned. I believe that. Then he went and talked about smallholders. But this is where I disagree with him. I'm a smallholder. I got a few acres. The market price you're talking about is for finished products. But when you look at the price that the smallholders pay, for example, rubber, it has gone down by 70%. You're talking about latex being sold to the wholesalers. Now, what's the implication of that? Smallholders in normal circumstances are not able to buy the artificial chemical fertilizers which are more damaging. They rely more on, of course, organic fertilizers. Many of them are not actually farming because they can't even bring their costs, recover the costs. It is abandoned. That is good for biodiversity to thrive. So on the ground, the reality is very different. So I think we need to, while we want to talk about smallholders, we need to look at the real challenges. You know, they don't have the capacity to drain the peatlands because the areas are so small. In many ways, you look at it, of course, I agree with you, the productivity is low for good reasons. In many ways, they are sustainable. And I'll be very happy to hear that despite the 50% reduction in market prices and about 70% reduction in rubber prices, that you would have be willing to pay a reasonable price for the smallholders. I think that's a better thing to do. Thank you.
Gentlemen, in closing up, I guess the two questions, one is about what to do with the rogue players. What do you do as the big guys where there are smaller rogue players either supplying to you or you're dealing with them? And the second, I guess, is coming back to the question of prices. Are the impacts at the ground level of those prices really deleterious right now? Or what are the prospects if we suddenly see a growth in prices, and will that lead to more further expansion? Would you like to close off on that and also share any thoughts with us? But I'm sadly going to give you each about 1 minute. Could we start with Mark and then move down in the same order you started?
Okay, thank you. I think the simple answer to the rogue actors is enforcing legislation. I mean, the legislation is there, and if that's enforced, particularly in countries like Indonesia, then those rogue actors will clearly stop their actions. In terms of the point about prices, there is definitely a very real impact on how smallholders invest in their crops when prices come down. Smallholder rubber farmers at the moment are basically on a break-even price. So we've seen in the second and third quarter of last year, Malaysia rubber production go down by 17%, and in Indonesia went down by about 8%. Farmers are not tapping the rubber trees because they're not getting a remunerative price. So, and in addition, they will not be spending money on fertilizer. We're expecting to see that as well a little bit in the palm segment this year, that smallholder farmers will obviously slow down their investments. I mean, that's just naturally. But the larger companies tend not to have the same immediate response to prices. I'll stop there.
I think with regard to the first question, what we are doing, for example, is like the IPOM, where we have, you know, the groupings of the big players, you know, getting together, you know, in order to have, you know, common standards. And I think that certainly helps, because what we feel is that the industry is also, you know, getting a lot of flake from people, you know, who are wayward, and then it ends up, or, you know, all of us suffer. So therefore, we would like to work together as a group, because certainly, you know, there's no way, you know, any player can do it, you know, on their own, you know. I think collaboration really is the key. And I think when you have collaboration, then the chances of, you know, having positive changes, I think, and is greatly enhanced. On the issue of smallholders, I don't know about on the rubber side, but certainly in Asian Agri's case, number one, on price. In Indonesia, the price at which we buy from the smallholders are regulated, really. So those are gazetted price, so it's very transparent and clear, and there's no mucking around. Secondly, as I said, in our case, we actually supervise, literally have a full-time planters, on the ground with the smallholders, helping them, on their cultivation. And so even when prices come down, unlike, the other smallholders, but for the smallholders, under our umbrella, we make sure that they continue to fertilize and their yields are not affected despite the falling prices. And wherever assistance that can and should be given, we provide that to them.
I'll address the first question. We have a policy, we're working to apply it, and we will apply it 100%. If other companies, to the statistics that were cited, do the same thing, that obviously will make a difference. Legislation, to Mark's point, and good regulation and enforcement will make a difference as well. But I think it's also important to unpack some of these issues. It's not just about individual companies and what they're doing. My understanding of a lot of the challenges that are existent in Southeast Asia with palm, and they're existent in other countries with other crops, is that this is a development issue. This is a question of government policy, of indigenous groups that want to develop, of smallholders that want to develop. And so we also have to be thinking about not just the stick, but what's the carrot? What's the alternative that's being presented to these countries or these communities that are viable development opportunities? And that's something that clearly will only come through the creation of, as I mentioned earlier, larger markets that could compensate for the natural capital assets they have, but also engagement directly on the ground to unpack and help solve these problems. And that's a collaborative effort that is not necessarily a binary one. So there's a lot of work to be done in some of those areas. We're active in some of it and will continue to be, and hope that the parties that are involved with those matters are all at the table as well.
Thank you, Lindsay, Mr. Lindsay. Last speaker, Koni from government, and now with the NGO WRI, isn't well placed to talk about prices, he tells me, but he certainly is well placed to give us some closing thoughts about the sort of price fluctuation in the future for the resource sector in Indonesia.
Big undertaking, if I may say. Well, for me, picking up from the last question, which is on price that is being felt by the smallholders, there are always gaps between the price accepted by or received by smallholders and the price on the market. Yeah. They always be less than the price on the market. There should be something there that needs to be fixed, yeah, so that the smallholders could also share the same price as the market price. So what I have seen is the issues of legality, yeah, because they are part of the supply chains of the big companies, and the big companies now, as one of the gentlemen said, 90% of them is regulated by this a good pledge: no deforestation, no peat, and so on and so on. Now, what we need for them is to make them legal. And then we can help them, we can support them, and then it's only with this then they can enjoy a good price and a fair price that probably the same as the market price. And there is something that can be done through the process of clearing things up in regard to legalities issue. Thank you.
Gentlemen, please join me in thanking the panelists for their contributions.